everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion. The topic today, of course, is fly-ins. We've just had a fabulous fly-in in Omarama. We were blessed with great weather. There were roughly 150 people there, something between 60 and 75 planes over the 2-3 day period that people came and went. And a really interesting time. I was there as well, and I thought what might be useful, particularly for people who've not been to a fly-in at all or have not been to one recently, might be useful to see how AOPA NZ is running fly-ins now, and what it's like for those who turn up, and answer some of the questions that maybe some fly-in newbies might have, in terms of what's it like and how does it work. So we've assembled together 7 people from the AOPA NZ community who have been heavily involved with organising and running fly-ins or leading groups or what have you. You'll understand a bit more about each of them and their approach to flying and fly-ins as we get through some of these questions I'm going to ask. But rather than get everybody to introduce themselves in a long-winded way, I've asked them just each to come up with one fact that most people at AOPA NZ won't know about them. And I'm going to get everybody just to introduce themselves really quickly, but I'm going to start with Gavin Wills. And the reason I'm starting with Gavin is, at least for the Omarama fly-in, he was the local. He's got lots of experience flying around the Mackenzie country and indeed many other places as well. But this was his local area that we were all coming to. And, both with his powered flying experience and his gliding experience, it was really great to have him heavily involved in organising this one. So, Gavin, what do people not know about you?
Well, I was chief guide at Mount Cook for 12 years, so I climbed the mountains around there a lot, climbed Mount Cook itself many times. And so prior to being a aeroplane pilot, I was a mountain guide.
Hi, I'm Murray Patterson. I've been a member of AOPA for a number of years, but the one thing most people don't realise that I've owned probably 13 aircraft, and one of the biggest thrills I ever got was building my own aircraft with a friend and seeing it come from a box of bits and pieces to actually flying, and it's still flying today with another good friend, and it's the best fun I ever had and the greatest knowledge I gained.
I'm John Evans, and my previous job was working in a program to get pilots out of aircraft and have them fly remotely. So clearly that didn't pan out because I love flying airplanes myself.
I'm Neville Bailey. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, I did a lot of paragliding and hang gliding and ran a very small paragliding school.
I'm Kevin Anderson. I don't snore. And in 1999, I won a national ewe-hogget sheep competition, which I was very proud of at the time.
Hi there, I'm Dave Patterson, and something you don't know about me, I'm a staunch Highlanders supporter. Born and bred in Central Otago, and have been supporting the Highlanders for the last 25 years since their inception in the 90s.
All right, so first question really, and it's the most important one for somebody who's never been to a fly-in. I'm going to direct this to you, Murray, probably because you've been to as many fly-ins as just about anyone on this panel. And that is, what exactly is a fly-in and what's its purpose?
The purpose is fun and frivolity and meeting new people, and we've developed a whole new way of going about it, that everybody who comes to a fly-in first up is treated with respect, and that they can come and expect to enjoy it and come back with go home with a big smile on their face, that they've been able to meet new people, go to new places, and be part of the AOPA family.
And do you generally have the same people turning up every time? Is it a mixture? Are they growing in numbers? What's the pattern at the moment?
So most recently, our fly-in at Omarama, I think we had 13 new what we would call first timers that hadn't been to an AOPA event before, and just about every one of them said that was just they'd been worrying about it, and once they got there, they found it. They didn't understand why they'd been so worried about it. That it was actually so easy, very accommodating people, and they met some really neat people, and the start, I would say, of lifelong friendships.
When they told you they were worrying about it, did they tell you what in particular they were worried about, or was it different for everyone?
I think generally it is so many aircraft being in one place at the same time, but they have until once you get on the line and see the information that we send out, that it's actually there's a lot of organisation goes into it. So I think that puts their mind at rest, and once they are on the wavelength of how we operate, and it is pretty easy really, and I think they're all totally relieved generally that they had really nothing to be worried about, and that we're actually all doing the same thing for the love of aviation.
Okay, so on the safety aspects or being very organised, that sort of flips over nicely to John. So John, part of your current role at AOPA NZ is that you head up the safety side of things, and you know, when you're organising a fly-in where you've got 75 planes coming into the same airfield, that must be a little bit of a thought process that goes on in terms of planning all of that. Tell me about the planning or the principles that go into safety around a fly-in, John.
Well, the key to running a successful fly-in is to have the right people meeting up together in the lead up, so it's no one person who's sharing any worry or whatever, that we're discussing it amongst a wider group with the likes of Murray and Kevin and Dave that have had a lot of experience in the past. The key thing for people to understand when they do attend is it requires a whole other set of flying discipline to fly in a group environment, and that's sticking to order and being very courteous of the people in front of you and behind you. So that's what people develop over time, and we really encourage that at briefings, because we send a lot of documentation out, and there's a lot for people to read, and there's some really critical punch points that we brief really leading up to the flying activities, so that people get those key things. But all sorts of preparation goes into it from everybody.
So just jumping back to what Murray said about, some people being a bit nervous if they've never been to a fly-in before, and then linking that to what you just said about, a different way of flying. How do the newbies at a fly-in cope with suddenly having to fly in a different way, having to fly with 8 or 10 other planes in the way that you've just described?
Well, it's all about mentoring. So as we discussed before, we have a register of people coming, and we know a lot of them personally, and the ones we don't know, we make an effort to get to know them on the day before and leading up to it, to make sure that they're supported and get an idea of their experience level. And on the day, if they're new to it, then the likes of Dave Patterson will jump in with them and do some flying, or they'll be mentored by someone else. Back sort of 15 years ago, when I went to my first AOPA fly-in, just as a PPL pilot, I jumped in the back with someone else who's become quite a close friend, and got the experience that way, because it was well out of my depth to be jumping into that straight away.
Okay, cool. So there's options for people depending on what their comfort levels are. They don't have to necessarily fly at their first fly-in?
Absolutely. We just accommodate people for what they want to achieve. Some people like just to get to the destination and enjoy the local environment and hospitality without doing any flying, or they might choose to ride in someone's spare seat. There's really no pressure, as Murray talked about earlier, that it caters for everybody. At the end of the day, it's a social occasion, and we all just want to have a nice social time and get back safely without taking huge risks. It's not the place for that, and it's discouraged.
Thanks, John. So, Dave, I'm going to segue to you, because John mentioned you as being someone who's safety conscious. Of course, you're a commercial pilot as well as a recreational pilot when you're not going long distance. Can you tell me about the whole briefing process on the morning of the main flying day, and how people, first of all, get their safety information, and secondly, how they choose their groups?
So we, as a leadership group, we get together, as John said, in probably the 2 weeks leading up to a flying, but it can be up to 4 weeks if it's a really big flying. And especially in the 10 days leading up, we form a series of groups and areas that people might like to go flying, on airstrips they might like to visit. And in the night before, we would, depending on what areas we've organised and got permission to use, we would start to form these groups, and we would publish on a whiteboard around a briefing room or a meeting room. We talk about which areas we'd like to go to and where the various leaders groups will be taken. And normally that leader will have gone to all those airstrips before or know the area quite well, and they'll have a pretty good knowledge of that area. So we talk about that the night before, and then the morning of the flying, we get together in those groups. So there'll be a larger briefing, and then we will split into smaller groups for a slightly more boutique briefing for that group and where we head into next. So typically what happens is we brief the first airstrip and the second airstrip. It's a good starting point. Normally the first airstrip is a relatively straightforward airstrip. Typically a nice big paddock somewhere which caters for a variety of abilities. And then we would brief that first airstrip. We all get to that airstrip, and then everyone can take a bit of a breath. We're away from the base. We've all got started. Often in the winter, there's problems with the airplanes and flat batteries and starter motors and things like that. If we can get to the first airstrip, and then often we might have a cup of tea there, and it's a nice place to enjoy watching everybody come in, and we meet up there, and then we brief progressively as the day goes on. So typically we brief 1 or 2 airstrips ahead of us so that people have the option. There might be a challenging airstrip followed by a slightly easier airstrip, which caters for everybody to have a great time, really. And that's why we do it like that, so it doesn't overload people, and it allows people to fly to their abilities, and it caters for everybody.
So thanks, Dave. In a second, Kevin, I'm going to ask you a question, but first of all, because it's related, Murray, just tell me really briefly, you were the leader of your group and you were off to the Maniatoto with them. What happened in the first section of your trip?
So we all got out, as David explained, out of Omarama, and we're heading to the long slip, and we all got landed there and got briefing. And I try and find a bare piece of ground and got a stick or a screwdriver and can draw a good diagram of the ground of where we're going to next. A couple of strips, and we got that briefing done between Kevin and I. And often we'll get, if we've got a variety of aircraft, we'll get the fastest away first, down to the slower ones, so we're not having to pass if we can help it. And also, if someone's been to the next trip and has experience, we'll let them get away first as well. Then they can check out for rabbits and bits and pieces. So on startup, my aircraft didn't want to start. I had a problem, so I could go nowhere. So Kevin, who thought he was going to be Charlie and Charlie, all of a sudden became the leader and took over from where I'd been. And it was they had a great day, and they carried on to all the same strips. And I managed to get a hand to get started and back to Omarama. So yeah, so it can happen, and everybody was offering all their assistance, but I was able to get jump start and back to Omarama on my own steam.
Great. So over to you, Kevin. You were suddenly, from Taylor and Charlie, thinking probably that you were going to have a nice stress-free day. You were suddenly the leader of the group, but obviously you've done it many times before. How was it sort of taking the hot seat for that group, and what did that change for you for your flying that day?
It probably didn't change too much as far as the flying went, but I guess the responsibility lifts quite a large amount, and it just makes you suddenly very conscious of being in charge of the group and
And I know from listening to how the groups were split up that generally speaking, the leaders, or even the backup leaders, as you were on that day, of the group, they know the areas fairly well. Just tell me about your knowledge of strips in the Maniatoto, because you were then leading that group all of a sudden.
Well, I guess I have been around quite a few of them a number of times, and there's certain strips that are less or more challenging than others, as anyone who flies would know. But I was just mindful of the group and the weather. We had a bit of wind in one place, and so we had to sort of counter for that. But yeah, it just I don't know. We just worked out a little bit of a circuit, and everyone was in agreement with where we would go. So we just briefed, as Murray said earlier, or one of the boys said earlier, one circuit, one strip ahead of where we were all the time, and keep the load on the pilots' minds as low as possible for that part of it. And by about 2 o'clock, everyone's adrenaline is starting to drop. So then a couple probably think they need to go back for fuel, and another person says they might only do one more strip. So the day starts to become a bit easier then.
So, Gavin, I want to move to you next. You're very local to where this fly-in took place. In fact, you live very, very close to the airport, and you've spent a large chunk of your life flying around this area. So I'm going to ask you, what's so special about this area? Why does it make it such a great place to have a fly-in?
Well, Omarama, it's very beautiful, but it's also a big plain, the south end of the Mackenzie country, which is surrounded by mountains. So you can be either close to the mountains or you can be away from the mountains out over the flats. And so it's easy for newcomers to the area to be comfortable. They don't have to be buried in the mountains. And yet there are lots of mountain gullies and ridges and lakes and rivers to fly along and up and down. So it's an ideal place to get an introduction to mountain flying.
Gavin, on the Saturday night of the fly-in, special mention was made about you being a strip ferret, somebody who had found an unfeasibly large number of really good strips for various groups to land on during the fly-in. Can you just tell me about some of those strips and what it actually took for you to ferret them out and get permission for, a dozen or more pilots to land on them?
Well, there are many strips in this area, and they've been developed for hunting, for farming, for spreading superphosphate, for home strips for farmers. There's all sorts of reasons for them to be there, and I've been looking for them and looking at them really for 50 years. And many of the strips, the larger ones, we use for landouts for gliding. So what I did to ferret out the strips was to go and look for strips that were easy enough and safe enough for our gang to find and fly on and land on. And they all needed to have enough space for us to be able to stop and turn around and get out and have a chat. But they also needed to be a little bit challenging for some, so that because some of the group are quite experienced. So the more experienced pilots got experience in landing on sloping strips and strips that would come up to a bit of a platform. And these strips have been often on the sides of mountains and have been built for top dressing. They may look a bit intimidating, but in fact, they are pretty much more straightforward than they look. because they've been built for very expensive top dressing aeroplanes to fly off. So there's a whole range of strips available in the mountains, and I pick and choose ones that are suitable for our group.
I'm going to pass over to Neville now. So, Neville, you're also an experienced pilot with piloting far beyond PPL stuff. But you obviously were at this fly-in as well. Tell me about the group that you were in. Sort of the types of strips that you went to and how the day progressed.
Yeah, Mark, so the group that I was in was led by John Evans, and that was comprised mostly of the Cessna 180s, 185s, some Bearhawks, and a couple of Mauls. So your typical backcountry aircraft looking for a strip experience, and John led us into mainly top dressing strips, which was really good. We started much in the way that Dave described, actually, at an easier one, not too probably about 10 minutes from Omarama. Got everyone on the ground, and then had a bit more of a briefing prior to the next strip. And at each airstrip we went into, John briefed the next one after that, and also an alternative one in case people didn't want to go into them. Most of them, the one common factor was that a lot of them were sloping. I found that to be a lot of fun. And it was progressive. So to start off with, the first couple of airstrips had a mild slope, and it sort of built up through the day. There was never any pressure on us to go into any of the strips if we felt uncomfortable. There was one strip in particular had quite a decent slope on it. I think 3 of us landed there. The rest chose to carry on to the next airstrip. But all in all, just a ton of fun.
And can you just talk? I mean, obviously, you have different types of experience as well, including the commercial side of things. Can you just talk to the levels of experience that were in that group, and how that affected people's flying?
Yeah. My background is very different, and you were mentioning just a few minutes ago about people perhaps turning up for their first fly-in and not really knowing what to expect, and perhaps being even a little bit nervous about it. 2 years ago, that was me, because although I had the commercial flying background, it's very, very different to GA and very different to these type of AOPA fly-ins. So the experience levels in the group varied from commercial right down to PPL recreational. In fact, the bulk of the people attending these fly-ins are probably recreational pilots. But there's a tremendous amount of experience in that group. A lot of them fly in the backcountry regularly. A lot of them have got hundreds or even thousands of hours of recreational backcountry flying. So there's actually a role reversal for me. I'm learning off the far more experienced recreational pilots. That's where the experience lies.
John, you've already made some very specific comments around the general approach to safety at the fly-in. Just thinking about when you get sort of towards the end of the day of flying, you're in a group, maybe 6 or 12 people in the group, and there's a group leader, and you may be going to your 8th or 9th strip for the day. How do you approach safety to make sure everybody's comfortable, particularly when it's getting late in the day and people have been flying on and off with breaks for a few hours? What systems do you have in place to ensure that people are safe and sound?
We're a recreational organisation, so we rely a lot on our volunteering members to lead that process, but we really make people known that they're ultimately in charge of their own aircraft. They're the pilot in command, so we're careful about how much of other people's risk we take on, because that's not really our function. But through meeting with the group leaders leading up to the briefings with pilots on the day, is we've got a number of documents that we hand over, and there's a standardised briefing. A lot of stuff being built up over the years about the types of things that we need to brief that have caught people out in the past and that we really need to push. We've also got emergency response plans and contact trees, essentially, so that if something does go wrong, that we do have a centralised contact process just to handle things. But ultimately, in that sort of scenario, it's down to the CAA and the police. So we always look back on our fly-ins where nothing's gone wrong, and feel proud of that everybody's had a good time. But ultimately, it is a high-risk activity with aircraft flying and people's experience, and we can't drop our guard in that regard. And making sure that people understand their responsibilities as pilot and command, that they're legal, they're certified, the aircraft's performing, they're current, all those things that apply to your everyday flying life.
Dave, I just want to come back to you and talk about pressure to perform. So you've got a bunch of pilots together and off they go in separate groups. At times, everybody's coming back to Omarama. There are a lot of people watching. Is there pressure on pilots to perform? Do they feel they have to land at certain strips that they might not feel comfortable landing at? Do they have to stay with the group for the whole day? Are they free to return to base? How does that all work?
It's a really important part of the day is always having that option to return to base, and we promote that really widely. In fact, we had at least 2 aircraft that did that at the most recent flying at Omarama. They were for various reasons actually very happy just to head back to base and enjoy the afternoon at Omarama. We brief as leaders 1 or 2 airstrips ahead, and that relieves a whole bunch of pressure. We emphasise over and over several times during the day that there is absolutely no pressure to be seen or to go to any of these airstrips that we go to. As Neville said, there's a variety of airstrips. Some of them can be really quite challenging, and some of them we make sure that there's behind every challenging one there's one that's less challenging, and that gives a really good, what some people might describe it as an escape to the next place. And through the day, crikey, with I think we had 64 airplanes at Omarama, there would have been a lot that didn't go to strip B and ended up at strip C, so to speak, the next one that we'd briefed, and that happened throughout the day several times. In fact, if I go back to the group I was in, we had one aircraft. This nice chap had spent, I think, 7 or 8 years building his beautiful airplane. He didn't want to go to some of the airstrips that weren't a little bit more smooth. So that some of the airstrips were a bit rougher, and he had really small tyres. So that compounds the effect of an airstrip that's not really smooth. So there was quite a few airstrips, and it wasn't his ability, it wasn't his airplane that couldn't have done it. It was more the fact he didn't want to go on the rough strips. So he would often choose to overfly the airstrip that we were on and head to the next one, and that happened at least 3 times during the day, and that's absolutely fine. We cater for that and encourage it.
Gavin, back to you as the local on the panel. Just about everybody who came to the fly-in came from outside of the Mackenzie Basin. In other words, there are not many people living in the Mackenzie Basin, so ergo, most of the people coming to the fly-in were coming from elsewhere and therefore flying in an area maybe that they don't spend a lot of time in. What do you think GA pilots can learn from a weekend at a fly-in, specifically in Omarama?
Well, a weekend in Omarama offers lots of different opportunities. One, I think, is the mountain flying opportunities. For people that have done a little bit or no mountain flying at all, it's a great place to learn mountain flying skills. It's an incredibly beautiful place, so just the sheer beauty of flying around this area is special. And it's a great jumping off place to going deep into the Southern Alps, up and around Mount Cook, or even down to Fiordland, and certainly out to the east coast. I mean, it's only 80 kilometres from one coast to the other, so there's a huge range of terrain available to fly through. And the final thing, of course, about coming on a weekend like this is that you're meeting pilots from all around the country, pilots that have a great range of experience and love to talk about flying and love to share their own experience. So it's a great place to come, meet other pilots and have a lot of fun.
Neville, I just want to ask you a question, probably from more of a personal perspective. You are an experienced pilot with lots of commercial hours under your belt, and obviously, with your private aviating as well. For someone with experience like you've got, why would you bother to turn up to an event like this and take part in a fly-in?
That's an interesting question. Thanks, Mark. Put it this way, the last few years of my career, when I was sitting at flight level 370 sipping a hot coffee, all I was dreaming about was building and flying my own small plane and getting out in the backcountry with people like this. So when I came back to New Zealand 3 years ago, one of the first things I did was join the AOPA, and I was lucky enough to go along for a ride in someone else's aircraft to a Haast fly-in a couple of years ago. Look, for me, it's largely about the people, meeting a really good group of people, making new friendships, and it's hard not to do that. The flying is almost secondary, but of course I love the flying as well. I built my own aircraft. There's quite a few home-built or amateur-built category aircraft that turn up to these flying gatherings. So that's part of the attraction for me, just being around like-minded people. And one of the other things is people take their families and their partners along with them. So it's more than perhaps just a bunch of middle-aged guys like we're seeing here. We actually take our partners along and have a really good weekend away. So it's the social activities and the friendships, really.
Kevin, you've been a lucky soul in that you've done a lot of flying in your life, and you still do a lot of flying. You've been to a lot of fly-ins. So I suppose same question for you, but from a slightly different perspective. What keeps you coming back to fly-ins?
I think I'd probably think along the same lines as Neville. Actually, it's the people you meet and the great friendships I've made. I've made friendships all over New Zealand through fly-ins, and it's just amazing. And they're a great calibre of person that comes to the fly-in, and the flying is also a great part of it. We all talk about it. We all discuss what we're doing and how we did it, and there's a lot of learning goes on, as well as the great friendship. Out of it comes a lot of learning, and the newer people mix with the older people. It's just a common bond that everyone has, and so I just don't know. I just entrenched in the idea and keep turning up, I think.
I'm going to come back to you, Gavin. Again, you're the person who lives very locally to Omarama, and you've spent thousands and thousands of hours flying both powered and in gliders around the area. So it's very familiar to you. What did you get from the weekend? Like, afterwards, reflecting on it, what benefits or joy did you get?
Well, I really enjoy showing off our terrain and our countryside. I really like helping, mentoring pilots who are not familiar with strip flying or not familiar with flying in the mountains. I like teaching and helping them become more confident in this environment. And so I have a great time in a weekend like this, leading people around my favourite places, showing off my favourite places to people, and watching them expand their own horizons and get better at what they love doing, which is flying.
Thanks, guys, for your answers to these questions and for your time and expertise and perspectives. It's been really good. Hopefully for people who have not been to a fly-in or have not been to one recently, they'll find this really useful material. For those of you watching, if there are still questions left unanswered for you, drop us a line at the email address that's listed on or near this video. Let us know what it is that you want to know, and we'll get some answers to you. Depending on the questions we get in, we may also create a follow-up video with one or two of the panelists answering those questions. In the meantime, have fun flying, keep safe, and we'll see you at the next AOPA NZ fly-in.